Today, we're digging into a really fascinating idea that connects money directly with political power. It's called the investment theory of politics. All right, let's dive in.
So let's start with this question. I mean, it sounds a little crazy, right? 320 people? But stick with me, because this question gets right to the heart of what we're exploring. How can a group that small possibly influence policy for a country of over 300 million?
Well, the core idea is actually pretty straightforward. The investment theory of politics basically says that political engagement, things like campaign donations, lobbying, it's not just about what you believe in. It's treated like a business strategy, an investment made with the clear expectation of getting a financial return through friendly laws and regulations.
Okay, so to really get how this works, the theory kind of breaks down the population into a funnel. We're going to go right down this list, starting with the 3.2 million people at the top, the 1%, and we'll drill all the way down to that tiny group of 320 people to see how their roles and their influence really change at each level.
First up, let's talk about the widest part of our funnel, the 1%. According to this theory, their main role isn't necessarily writing laws, but more about setting the whole tone of the national conversation, defining what the big political issues are.
So, we're talking about roughly 3.2 million people. Now, that's a tiny slice of the whole country, but it's the biggest group we're going to look at. And, these are very private people. But thanks to a pretty rare study that actually managed to survey them, we've got a surprisingly clear picture of what they care about.
And the results are? Well, they're striking. When you ask them what the single most important problem facing the country is, the overwhelming answer is the budget deficit. But here's the kicker. It's how they want to fix it. Their solution is almost always cutting government spending, especially on things like Social Security or food stamps, while they're very much against raising their own taxes to help fill that gap.
And when you put their priorities next to the general public's, you see this massive gap. On huge issues like creating federal job programs, raising the minimum wage, or even paying more in taxes for things like universal health care and schools, the views of the 1% are often the complete opposite of what the majority of people want. And that's the key point. They help set an agenda that is very different from everyone else's.
So, how does that agenda actually gain traction? This is where we move to the next layer of the funnel. As we get narrower, the role changes from just having preferences to taking direct action. We're talking about funding the entire political system.
Now, we're down to just 32,000 people. This is 1% of the 1%. Think top-level CEOs, financial managers, the real heavy hitters in business. And their political activity is way more intense.
I mean, just look at these numbers from the 2012 election cycle. This incredibly small group of 32,000 people accounted for more than a quarter of all political contributions. And get this, more than 80% of elected officials got more money from this tiny elite group than from all of their small-dollar donors combined. This is the financial engine that powers the whole theory.
So, what does all that money get them? Well, their agenda is even sharper and more focused. The absolute core goal is lower taxes. A huge chunk of the funding comes from what's called the FIRE sector. That's finance, insurance, and real estate. And what's really interesting is they fund both parties. This suggests they're investing in a general policy direction, not just one team, with a big, overarching goal of rolling back a lot of New Deal-era policies.
And this gets to a really interesting point about what a term like small government actually means in this context. It's not about shrinking everything. It's a very specific vision. You reduce social programs and you weaken unions, but at the same time you protect and even expand government giveaways and tax breaks that benefit specific industries, like the oil depletion allowance, which has been around for ages. And that brings us to the very, very top of the pyramid, the tip of the funnel. Here, the strategy gets even more organized, more direct, more hands-on. This is about actually executing a plan.
We are now talking about just 320 people. That's it. For all practical purposes, this group is the Forbes 400 list of the richest Americans. And at this level, the sheer scale of personal wealth allows for a kind of political organization that's just on a whole other level.
And this isn't something that just happened overnight. You can trace a clear timeline of this kind of organized action. It arguably kicks off with the Powell Memorandum in 1971, which was basically a call to arms for business to get way more involved in politics. That leads to the creation of groups like ALEC, designed to push model legislation in states. And then things go into hyperdrive after the 2010 Citizens United Supreme Court decision, which just opened the floodgates for money in politics. The Koch brothers are often used as a key example of this strategy. The method involves creating these secretive organizations that shield the donors and coordinate all the efforts. A favorite tactic is to focus on state legislatures because a little bit of money and influence can go a much longer way there. And the motivation? Well, it's presented as being both ideological and very, very profitable. And as you can see, secrecy is a huge part of the playbook.
This quote from Charles Koch back in 1978 really says it all. It frames resisting government regulation not just as a smart business move, but as a moral fight, a battle for justice. It's a really powerful way to look at it. Okay, so let's pull all these threads together now and bring it back to the main idea, the investment theory of politics. We've seen how it seems to operate on three really distinct levels of wealth and influence.
So here's the takeaway. Here's how the funnel is supposed to work. Step 1. The 1% creates the overall political climate, that focus on deficits and cutting spending. Step 2. The 0.01% comes in with the cash, the massive funding that makes politicians pay attention to that agenda. And finally, Step 3. The 0.0001% executes these highly targeted strategic campaigns to turn those broad ideas into actual laws. It's a strategy that moves from setting the agenda all the way down to writing the legislation.
And so all of this leaves us with one last pretty big question. If politics, for some, really is treated like an investment, what's the return? Something to think about. That's our look at this theory for today.